Welcome to the Bench Report UK Politics, straight from the benches. As always, we are your hosts, Amy and Ivan. Today, a topic that producer Tom wanted to look at, as it won't be long until his eldest son starts driving. Wow, getting old, Tom.
Indeed. And sometimes those personal milestones really shine a light on broader policy shifts, don't they? So today, you asked us to look into some recent parliamentary discussions about driving licenses and specifically how they're adapting to, well, all the zero-emission vehicles we're seeing now.
Let's get into it then. We're focusing on a particular piece of legislation, aren't we? The Draft Motor Vehicles Driving Licenses Amendment. Number 2, Regulations 2025. Bit of a mouthful.
It is, yes,
Yeah.
laid before the House on March 14th.
Right. And while it sounds technical, the idea is that this could actually affect quite a few of our listeners in their day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. Think of this deep dive as understanding how the rules are trying to catch up with the technology. Our mission here is to pull out the key changes being proposed and explain why they matter, whether you're, like Tom with a kid about to learn, or a business owner thinking about electric vans, or just someone interested in the UK's whole green transition.
And our main source for this is the official record, the Hansard, from the parliamentary debate on these regulations.
That's right, from April 2nd, 2025, straight from the benches, as you say.
So what's the government actually trying to achieve here? What are the big picture aims behind these rule changes?
Well, the Transport Minister, Mike Kane, laid out 3 main objectives. First, simply to support the shift to zero-emission vehicles. Second, to cut down on regulations, the red tape for businesses. And third, generally to boost economic growth, tying into that wider goal of being a sort of clean energy superpower.
Ambitious goals. Did he give any sense of how quickly this shift is happening? Any numbers?
He did. He mentioned the UK was actually the largest electric car market in Europe in 2024. And maybe more strikingly, that demand was apparently up 42% just in the first part of 2025. So there's real momentum there.
Okay, loads more EVs. But why does that mean changing the driving license rules? What's the link?
Well, this is the core issue. Zero-emission vehicles, particularly the battery electric ones, they tend to be heavier, significantly heavier sometimes because of the battery.
Right, batteries are heavy.
Exactly. And that extra weight can push a vehicle that looks like a standard van or car into a higher driving license category.
I see. So someone like me with a normal Category B car license, I might suddenly need, a C1 license to drive an electric delivery van for work?
Potentially, yes. Now, they did try to address this back in 2018 with some regulations. Those allowed Category B drivers to handle alternatively fueled vehicles up to 4.25 tons, but there were catches.
Catches? Like what?
Well, you had to do 5 hours of specific extra training. Plus, you could only use the vehicle for carrying goods, not passengers, really. And you couldn't tow anything.
That sounds quite limiting if you're a business trying to switch your fleet.
Precisely. And that's the government's current view. They're now calling those 2018 rules an unnecessary barrier. They argue that the tech has moved on so much since then, and the cost and time for that training are actually putting businesses off making the switch.
Okay, so the old rules are seen as outdated. What are the key changes in these new regulations then? What's the main takeaway for someone listening?
The headline is this. If these pass, someone with a standard Category B license, like many people listening, will be able to drive a fully electric or hydrogen vehicle weighing up to 4.25 tons. And crucially, without needing that extra training and without being restricted to just carrying goods.
So just get in and drive, essentially, as long as it's electric or hydrogen and under 4.25 tons.
Pretty much, though it's important to say all the other rules for a Category B license still apply, like minimum driver age, number of passenger seats, that sort of thing. Those don't change.
Got it. What about slightly larger vehicles, minibuses, for instance?
Yes, they've addressed those too. Basically the same extra conditions that already apply if you want to drive a standard minibus up to 3.5 tons on a Category B license, like being over 21, driving voluntarily, not for hire or reward. Those same conditions will now apply to zero-emission minibuses up to 4.25 tons.
So it's extending the weight limit for zero-emission minibuses,
Yeah.
but keeping the existing driver conditions.
Exactly. And towing. That was another restriction before.
Right. What happens with towing trailers? Lots
Yeah.
of people use vans for work or leisure that need to tow.
Good point. The new rules will allow these heavier zero-emission vehicles up to 4.25 tons to tow a trailer. The combined weight of the vehicle and trailer can't exceed 7 tons, which mirrors the existing rules for petrol and diesel vehicles, so it levels the playing field there.
Okay, that sounds much more practical. Now, I noticed in the debate record there was specific mention about disabled passengers. That seems important.
Yes, definitely. This is about equitable access. Recognizing that specialist equipment needed to carry disabled passengers adds weight, the regulations propose a higher limit. Eligible zero-emission vehicles adapted for disabled passengers can weigh up to 5 tons.
5 tons. That's a significant extra allowance.
It is, and that applies to adapted minibuses, too. It's trying to make sure that going green doesn't inadvertently disadvantage disabled people who rely on adapted transport.
Was there any confusion about which vehicles qualified for this?
There was a clarifying question, yes. Luke Akehurst from Labor asked about the scope, and the minister, Mike Kane, confirmed the specific allowance is for electric vehicles needing adaptation, not things like gas or synthetic fuel vehicles.
Which leads us nicely to that distinction. The shift from alternatively fueled in 2018 to strictly zero emission now. Why the change?
The new rules are narrower. They focus only on fully electric and hydrogen. Gas-powered vehicles, which sort of fell under the old alternatively fueled umbrella, are excluded from these specific weight allowances now.
And the reason for excluding gas?
The minister gave two main reasons. First, he said there are very few, maybe less than 30, gas-powered vehicles of this type actually on the road. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the technology itself doesn't generally require the same weight increase as battery electric or hydrogen systems do to achieve a similar payload, so they don't need the weight allowance in the same way.
Okay, that makes sense from a technical perspective. But whenever you talk about changing driving rules, especially with heavier vehicles, safety comes up. How is that addressed?
It definitely came up. There was a public consultation back in 2022. Most responses, apparently 89 in total, were supportive, but some did raise safety concerns.
Understandably.
Yes. The government's position is that the risk is low. They pointed to data from 2020 to 2023 showing only 9 collisions involving these heavier, alternatively fueled vehicles, and 6 of those were minor. But they did commit to monitoring incident data very closely and publishing detailed safety guidance developed with industry input.
So confident, but keeping an eye on it. Was everyone in Parliament convinced, though? Any pushback?
Oh, yes. There was definitely pushback, particularly from the conservative benches, actually. Greg Smith, MP, voiced quite strong concerns.
What was his main issue?
While he agreed with cutting red tape, his big objection was narrowing the scope only to zero-emission electric and hydrogen. He felt excluding other alternative fuels, especially synthetic fuels, was a mistake.
Why? What's the argument for including synthetic fuels?
His point was that this approach is too prescriptive. It's picking winners too early, he argued, and could stifle innovation and other sustainable fuel technologies that might be crucial down the line. Things like e-fuels.
And was he alone in this?
No, Kit Malthouse, another conservative MP, supported this view. He mentioned a company in his constituency, Zero Petroleum, making carbon-neutral fuels literally from air and water using renewable energy. His concern was that focusing solely on tailpipe emissions ignores the bigger picture of where the fuel comes from.
So the argument is that even if a synthetic fuel produces CO2 when burned, if that CO2 was captured from the atmosphere to make the fuel in the first place, it's essentially carbon neutral overall.
Exactly. Smith argued the current tailpipe test is too simplistic and disadvantages these potentially important technologies. He acknowledged the weight issue for EVs is real and needs addressing, but felt the regulations shouldn't close the door on other routes to decarbonization.
Did he mention the consultation results in relation to this?
He did. He noted that about 25% of the respondents to that 2022 consultation actually wanted to keep the broader alternatively fueled vehicles definition precisely for flexibility, especially in sectors that are harder to electrify quickly.
And he also brought up a previous issue with these regulations.
Yes, he pointed out that the government had actually withdrawn this statutory instrument once before because of a drafting error. He basically suggested they should pause again, amend it to include alternative fuels, and then bring it back. A fairer, more future-proof approach, in his view.
Okay, so a clear dissenting voice there on the technology scope. What about the main opposition party? Where do they stand?
They seem broadly supportive of the government's proposal. Dr. Scott Arthur indicated they agreed with the focus on zero-emission vehicles and the 4.25-ton threshold, seeing it as aligned with the 2035 target for ending new petrol and diesel car and van sales.
So, aligned on the main thrust? Any other perspectives? Liberal Democrats?
Yes, Paul Kohler for the Lib Dems raised a slightly different point. While supporting the zero-emission focus, he questioned the removal of the 5-hour training requirement from the 2018 rules. He wanted more justification from the government on why that training is no longer considered necessary for safety when driving these potentially heavier vehicles.
So a safety concern about dropping the training.
Precisely. He also linked it to the wider context, mentioning the need for better EV charging infrastructure and maybe bringing back incentives like the plug-in grant to really help people make the switch. Important practical points for anyone considering an EV.
So how did the minister respond to these different points, particularly the exclusion of synthetic fuels and the safety question about training?
Mike Kane reiterated the government's position. He stressed the regulations are specifically designed to address the weight penalty associated with batteries and hydrogen systems to ensure payload parity with conventional vehicles. He repeated that gas vehicles don't need this allowance and are covered by existing rules.
And on synthetic fuels.
His argument was that synthetic fuels are currently treated just like petrol and diesel for licensing. They don't inherently make the vehicle heavier in the same way batteries do, so they don't need this specific weight allowance to be competitive on payload. Therefore, including them in this particular instrument wasn't necessary, in his view. It's a tool for a specific problem.
And the training point.
He didn't seem to dwell heavily on counter-arguments to dropping the training in the summary, focusing more on the low incident rate data and the commitment to monitoring and guidance. The overall message was that this is a pragmatic, common-sense change needed to help decarbonize transport and meet net zero goals.
And despite the debate, the regulations were approved.
Yes, they were passed by the House.
Okay, so let's wrap this up for our listeners. The key takeaway is driving license rules in the UK are being updated. If you have a standard Category B license, you'll likely soon be able to drive heavier electric and hydrogen vans and cars up to 4.25 tons without needing extra training or being restricted to just goods transport. This is mainly to accommodate the weight of batteries.
But, importantly, this change specifically excludes other types of alternatively fueled vehicles, like those running on synthetic fuels, which caused some debate about whether the government is being too narrow in its focus. And there are still some lingering questions, particularly from the Lib Dems, about the safety implications of removing the mandatory training requirement.
So for producer Tom's son learning to drive soon, or for any business looking at their fleet, or just anyone thinking of future car choices, this matters. It potentially makes switching to certain types of zero-emission vehicles easier and more practical.
It does. It removes a potential hurdle. But it also raises that bigger question, doesn't it? Does this feel like the right step pragmatic support for the dominant EV tech? Or are the critics right to worry about potentially hindering other innovative routes to cleaner transport?
Definitely food for thought. As we push towards net zero, how exactly should the government define clean transport? Getting that balance right between promoting current solutions and keeping the door open for future ones. It's tricky. What are the risks if we get too prescriptive now?
A very pertinent question indeed. The long-term consequences are something we'll likely see unfold over the coming years.
As always, check out the episode notes, find us on social media at Bench Report UK, and get in touch with issues you want to hear about. Take care.
Hello there, this is Tom, the producer of The Bench Report. Listener suggestions are vital to my mission of making politics more accessible and accountable. So, if you have an issue that's really important to you, personally or professionally, and want to know what those in power are doing about it, please get in touch via email or via our socials at Bench Report UK. I'll grab another coffee and start scanning those parliamentary archives.